Okay, so this week you sent us something pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It's a YouTube video, Would You Lune by Jasno Widzi Krzysztof Jackowski official. And, well, we're going to deep dive into it.
Absolutely. Always up for a deep dive.
It's a recording of, like, some Sunday thoughts, just kind of free
Which is kind of
flowing.
the stream of consciousness.
Yeah, and we're going to try to unpack it, especially looking at predictions about the global economy, potential conflicts, and, maybe some societal changes that could be on the horizon.
All the big stuff.
Yeah, all the big stuff.
Right away, I'm struck by how this video, even though it's kind of informal, touches on some really weighty, interconnected themes.
Yeah.
It's not just economics or politics. It's like he's weaving together a bigger picture of how the world might be changing.
Yeah, and he starts by talking about the economy. He mentions this prediction he made about a year ago about a market downturn starting in April. And, we're seeing some worries about tariffs and, like, some dips in the stock market. He kind of sees that as just the start, like a small crash.
The tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, but he's really concerned about, like, a much bigger crash, something that lasts longer and really impacts everyday life.
Yeah, when it hits your wallet, that's when it gets real for people. Things like food prices going up, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
It does make you wonder about the forces driving these shifts. He definitely hints that maybe these aren't just random events,
Oh, yeah.
He talks about having a feeling that Trump is intentionally trying to create more instability, especially in currency markets. What do you think about that?
Well, it's pretty wild to think that the U.S., under Trump, might actually go against or even challenge the rules of, like, the World Bank,
Right, World Bank.
Yeah.
Just to give folks some context, it's this international financial institution that was set up after World War II to help developing countries get out of poverty and achieve sustainable development.
Yeah, exactly.
So the speaker's take is that Trump wants to shake things up to kind of force other countries to renegotiate with the U.S. It's a pretty bold strategy if you think about it.
It is. It's almost like he's trying to create this global uncertainty to get what he wants, He wants to set up new rules that protect the American economy and, like, keep the dollar as the main currency everyone uses.
Preserve that global dominance.
Yeah. And he uses this analogy. It's kind of like someone threatening war to get countries to agree to specific terms for the dollar and the U.S. economy.
Wow. So you're saying he's basically using global instability as leverage.
Yeah, I mean, that's what it sounds like to me. But then it gets even, like, darker because he's worried that the U.S. might actually trigger a big economic crisis on purpose.
On purpose.
Yeah, just to keep the dollar on top. Even though America itself has a lot of debt, it's a pretty intense idea.
It is. It definitely raises the question,
Mm-hmm.
at what cost? Is the U.S. willing to potentially hurt its own people to stay on top of the global financial system?
Right. And then he moves on to this other thing. He talks about all these strangely bad things that have been happening globally since 2020 and how they all seem connected.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples.
Well, like the pandemic. It kind of faded out just as the Ukraine war started. Then there's the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. He even mentions this, like, really disturbing incident with Israeli forces and, like, medical personnel in Gaza.
Oh, gosh.
And obviously the Russia-Ukraine war is still going on.
So he sees a pattern, like one crisis flowing into the next.
Yeah, and he keeps saying how interconnected they are. It's not just isolated events. He's suggesting that maybe it's a sequence, like something bigger is happening.
That's definitely a thought-provoking way of looking at it. It's like a domino effect almost.
Right. And what's really scary is that he predicts another local war could escalate, leading to even more casualties, on top of this major economic crisis that he thinks could take years for us to recover from.
So basically a perfect storm of global crises.
Yeah, it's a grim picture. And then he asks this question. He says, does this seem like a pre-planned scenario unfolding? It really makes you think.
It does make you wonder, It taps into that feeling a lot of us have, like we're just being bombarded with bad news constantly.
Totally. And then he goes on to talk about fear.
Fear. Okay.
Yeah, social manipulation and fear. He brings up all this attention on UFOs in the U.S. lately, congressional hearings, mainstream media coverage.
Interesting.
He even mentions these reports of experiments where they had people dressed as aliens, like, to see how the public would react. It's bizarre.
It is kind of strange.
Yeah.
So where's he going with this?
Well, he links this whole UFO thing to this idea that fear, whether it's about a pandemic, war, or economic collapse, is a tool. He thinks it's a way to control people and prevent unrest while this plan of his unfolds.
That's a pretty bold claim.
It is, But he goes on to talk about the very real fear people have right now about the economy. People are worried about their loans, their savings, losing their jobs. But he suggests that some people, maybe those in power, are intentionally trying to make things worse for people in Europe and the US, to widen the gap between the rich and everyone else.
So he's suggesting that these fears are being exploited.
Yeah, exactly. And then he circles back to those local wars, the ones he mentioned before, and says they might be part of this larger plan to reduce the population.
Okay, that's a pretty heavy idea. It's definitely getting into conspiracy theory territory.
Yeah, it is. Then we get to Elon Musk.
Oh, Elon Musk. What did he do now?
Well, the speaker mentions these statements Musk made during a video call with this Italian political party. I think it was reported by Onet News.
Okay.
Musk said he hopes the U.S. and Europe can work more closely together, which sounds good, right?
Yeah, sure.
But then he drops this bombshell. He warns about massive terrorist attacks and massacres in Europe. Yeah, and he claims that the media isn't reporting on all the attacks that are already happening. He even said he's seen a huge shift in attacks in Italy and Europe, that the trend is towards these massive massacres that could endanger your friends, your families, everyone.
That's pretty terrifying. And coming from Elon Musk, it definitely carries some weight.
Right. But then he also talks about future zero tariffs and free exchange between the U.S. and Europe.
Okay. So a mix of alarming warnings and potential economic benefits. It's kind of hard to know what to make of that.
Yeah, it's a weird mix. But the speaker thinks Musk's warning is, tendentious. He sees it as another way to create fear in Europe, to pressure them into cooperating with the U.S., but on America's terms.
Okay, so he's not buying it.
Nope. He's suspicious that this close cooperation really means Europe has to fully support the U.S. and the dollar and can't do things like, join initiatives like BRICS without U.S. approval. He really stresses that we need to watch out for future attacks, suggesting that they might not be random and that Musk might be hinting at some larger plan.
So he sees this as a calculated move, a way to manipulate Europe.
Yeah, that's his take. And then he gets into technology.
Okay, here we go.
He starts talking about how, for these elites, human life is becoming less valuable because of overpopulation and strain on resources.
Licks.
Yeah, and then he brings up artificial intelligence. Specifically, he talks about these Chinese scientists who've developed brain-computer interfaces that can, control devices with your thoughts.
That's some next-level stuff.
It is, and it connects back to this vision he had a while back about humans being connected to a network, and maybe even getting this euphoria program to deal with difficult living conditions.
A euphoria program? What does that even mean?
I don't know, it sounds kind of sci-fi, right? Like we'd all become these biological network cyborgs.
Yeah, that definitely sounds like something out of a movie. But I guess his point is that technology is advancing so fast that it's hard to even imagine what the future holds.
Exactly. And he talks about how in the future, it might be hard to tell the difference between humans and robots, even in relationships.
Okay, now that's just creepy.
I know, right? But then he gets into e-services, like those online doctor consultations, e-government, online schooling.
Oh, yeah, all that stuff that became super common during the pandemic.
Right. And he thinks the pandemic was like a general rehearsal for this kind of world where everything is online.
So he's saying it wasn't just a temporary thing. It was a shift towards a more digital way of life.
Exactly. And he even mentions President Duda advertising esports during the first lockdown, and how remote work, which used to be rare, is now becoming the norm.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
But he's worried about the quality of these e-services, especially now that AI can mimic voices so well.
Like, how do you know you're actually talking to a real doctor?
Right. And he thinks this transition to a new world order is happening right now, and that it's already at a pretty advanced stage.
Okay, so this is a big part of his theory, this new world order.
Yeah, and he contrasts the way we used to live, especially in developed countries, with this coming reality where everything will be scarce and expensive.
Pretty bleak outlook.
He even says that governments might demand people hand over their gold during a crisis.
Whoa.
And then he mentions this story about the president of Tanzania, or maybe it was Guyana, he wasn't sure, who supposedly claimed that a piece of fruit tested positive for COVID.
A fruit? Really?
Yeah, it's supposed to show how everything is manipulated. And he believes AI technology is probably way more advanced than we realize and that it's being rolled out slowly. His main message seems to be that we shouldn't look at all these things, the pandemic, the wars, the economic crises, as separate events.
He thinks it's all connected.
Yeah, like pieces of a puzzle that fit together to create this bigger picture, this new world order.
A new world order that he clearly doesn't think is a good thing.
Definitely not.
Hmm.
And in his final thoughts, he says he's not really interested in predicting things like Polish elections anymore because he thinks the world has changed so much since 2020.
So national politics don't seem as important to him anymore.
Yeah, it's like he thinks something much bigger is happening on a global scale. He also points out some of Trump's actions that seem contradictory, like his relationship with Putin.
That's an interesting point.
He also gives his personal opinion about mortgages. He says no one should take one out, no matter the interest rate, and that we should all be careful with our savings.
That's pretty specific advice.
Yeah, it is.
I
And he ends by saying that everything feels like fantasy now, but it's a real fantasy.
think a lot of people can relate to that feeling.
Yeah. So to sum up this deep dive into Wijebanoon, we've explored some pretty intense predictions and concerns, a potential economic collapse, maybe even triggered by the U.S., a series of interconnected global crises that might be part of a larger plan for control, the rise of social manipulation through fear and technology, and Elon Musk's warning about increased terrorism in Europe.
It's a lot to take in. And it's important to remember that this is just one perspective based on the source material you gave us.
Excellent.
This deep dive is really meant to encourage you, the listener, to think critically about everything you see and hear, to question the narratives that are presented to you.
And on that note, here's a final thought for you to ponder. If this speaker is right, if there really is this planned new world order unfolding, what can we do as individuals? How do we navigate such a complex and uncertain future? That's something worth thinking about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.